yourself, and that's okay. So blending it is always a really, really, really good idea.
Yeah, and I would say, Sarah, that if you are worried about too much organic matter in the soil, it's not broken down. Sometimes it's in big enough clumps or pieces of bark or whatever that you can rake out. And so I often do that, and I often form a little fence of undecomposed organic matter on the side of my bed. But the other is that, maybe if that comes the first year, it should only be a first year problem. If somebody's getting in soil, maybe it's just a little more compost, like Pea says, a well-rounded compost and a little bit more the first year.
Right. So we are going to continue on. Sarah's going to come back a little bit later and tell you a little bit about what she's doing, which is pretty cool. And I can't wait for that to happen. But first and foremost, we're going to finish up with the seeds, the first plantings. So here we go. Okay.
This top layer is pretty well prepared.
Yep. You got it.
So right now, just especially, if you're doing transplants, having a rough bed is totally fine. But we're going to be putting in a greens mix, so a baby kale, kind of kale salad, mustard mix, and radishes. And those seeds are pretty itty bitty, so we want to have kind of a nice fine surface layer. They're going to have a very shallow planting. Kind of rule of thumb, planting depth is dependent on seed size. So the smaller the seed, the shallower the planting. In a moment, I can show you those seed sizes, but we'll kind of quickly try to go over this bed so that we can start putting in some rows of the radish and greens mix. So in the second bed, we're going to need to put in trellising for the peas. So we'll do a double row of peas. One will be the snap peas, one will be snow peas. We don't have the trellis material with us today, but we'll mark it out with these bamboo so we can keep a straight line and a double planting, so on either side of the string, and then the peas will grow up. These seeds will be planted about somewhere between 1/2 inch and 1 inch. So I'm just doing a kind of a marker along here that we can plant in. And again, like I said, we will have trellis material set up after the seeding is done. But just to give us a sense of where these seeds will be, so we can have a somewhat straight row. And then the nice thing, so this particular tool that we met earlier, the Scuffle Hoe, can be used for cultivating along the rows when you do get the initial growth of weeds, and we can kind of get it in between these two rows as well. So it's a tool of many uses, well worth the investment. So we're seeding these on the close side. They'll have 2 sides to grow up the trellis. And so we're putting them just about 1 inch apart, and that'll also, if we have any failure of germination, also ensure that we can get some good growth. So. And if there are too many, you can always eat the pea shoots and spin out your crop. So you can see we've got all the seeds kind of laid out. They don't have to be perfectly spaced. But then if you have this little trench, right, this little channel that you're planting in, you can just very quickly go back over and cover those seeds up, and it's going to be about the right amount of soil, right? And then I always go back down and kind of tamp it down, just so that when we water, it doesn't, the soil doesn't, just fall away. Most seeds need darkness in order to germinate. There are a few that do require some light, but those are much less common. The other ones like to hibernate in the dark for a bit. And if the weather stays warm like this, we should see sprouts from these peas in about a week. So they're pretty quick. And that's a good kind of marker to look for. So now that this first bed is prepped, we have a finer top layer for seeding these small seeds. We're going to start out with 3 rows and probably leave room for a 4th one that we can seed in another week or week and a half so that we have kind of a succession planting going. So this first row is going to be a kale and mustard mix, so a small kind of baby lettuce mix that we call like a cut and come again mix. So you can do a harvest, it'll grow back in a week to a week and a half. You can do multiple harvests from a single sowing. And then we have a couple of different varieties of radish that we'll put in. Radishes are a great crop for beginners. They don't take up a whole lot of space and they're super quick. So they have usually around a 21 to 24 day seed to harvest turnaround. So we're going to start that here. Again, I'm going to space them approximately the width of this cultivator hoe so that we can run down the row between for any cultivating of small weeds. And that will give them enough space to have plenty of nutrients. So I'm going to use the same kind of technique where I'm just going to do a super shallow kind of marker, more so that I have a straight line versus a lot of soil to cover these tiny seeds. So once I get these out, we'll kind of try not to trip. And we're putting the greens on the outside because those you'll need to get a little bit closer to harvest versus on the inside. And the radishes, since you pull those right out of the ground, those can be in the middle and we can kind of reach over the greens and harvest those. And as we've been working, you've probably noticed that this is a pretty sunny location. And most vegetables will do much better in full sun. There are some that are more shade tolerant. We'll talk about that down the road a bit. Some greens like a little bit less direct sun. They might get a little bit sunburnt, or with the heat they'll tend to bolt. But we can talk about that a little bit later when we get into some of the actual growing. But now for seeding. All right, so these are the kale and mustard mix. So as you can see, they're pretty small. We're going to use a technique that's, I call it the sprinkling technique. So I'm not actually going to be spacing them particularly, but I am going to keep them in this nice row versus like a broadcast seeding, which you can also do with greens like this. But for this, I'm just going to, as I go down the row, kind of what I'm doing, I have the seeds between my fingers and I'm just kind of rolling them like this as I move. And so that kind of allows the seeds to fall somewhat regularly. And again, these can be quite close together because they're going to be harvested when they're young and they're quick. They don't need much in the way of space. So for covering these, the mustard and kale seeds that are now in here, again, it's a very shallow trench. I'm just going to gently kind of cover them up so that they do have some soil coverage, but not, you really don't want more than about 1/4 of an inch. And these will, if you do just sprinkle them on the surface and keep that surface moist, they don't necessarily need to be fully buried in order to germinate. So if you use that broadcast sowing and just kind of sprinkle them out, they should do just fine. So radishes, you can see these seeds are a little bit bigger. We're still going to space them pretty close together. You can always spin these out if they're too close. And one thing, some seed companies will tell you what the germination rate is. Radishes in general tend to have a really good germination rate. But again, I'm going to use a similar sprinkling technique and try to get them about 2 inches apart. Again, if you drop more than one seed in that 2 inches, don't fret. Finish my little handful of seeds here, since they're so small. Since I don't have my seed packet with me, I'm going to put a little marker where I stopped so I can pick up where I left off.
All right, so let's talk about watering. We've got the seeds in the ground, and a good lesson I like to remind people is that we want the soil to be moist, but we don't want to drown the seeds. A lot of people will just add water, which sometimes is actually counterproductive, because when the seeds and the plants are just soaked, they can't grow, they can't do what they need, they can't get that oxygen CO2 exchange in effect. So one of the things I like to do is I'll take my finger and stick it in the soil, and if it feels like a sloppy wet sponge, you definitely went too much. But if it feels moist, then you're probably just at the right amount. So what you see here in this propagation house, we have trays with cells pre-made. So we will put seeds right in these cells, and then as they mature and grow, we'll pull the plant out of the cell, put it out into the field. Now, Ariana is going to show us something that's really neat. It's called soil blocks. So instead of having a tray with these cells, you make these cool little soil blocks and plant right into those, and then you take those out into the field and transplant them when the seeds turn into little seedlings. So let's check it out.
So the recipe that we are using calls for 3 parts peat or coir. We're going to be using coir, which is a coconut peat fiber. It comes in a dried block that you then need to soak so that the material is workable. So I've already soaked the peat moss and measured out 3 parts of the coir peat. And then we're going to be using, today we're going to be using vermiculite. You can also use perlite. So we have our organic vermiculite. It calls for 2 parts of the vermiculite, and then 3 parts of a composted potting soil, compost and potting soil mix. Kind of container, depending on the quantity you want to mix up, using this handy pot from Lisa's barn. So here's our 1 part vermiculite. With the dust for vermiculite, it is good to use a mask, just so you don't inhale any of the dust particles. And then I'm going to measure out 3 parts of the compost potting soil. So here we have from the Vermont Compost Company. But you can really use any number of brands for this. But of course, we recommend a good organic supplier. So we have our dry mix here, so our compost, vermiculite, and coir peat. And then what we're going to do is just get it all mixed up quite well. The coir is still pretty saturated, so I'm not going to add any water just yet, but ultimately we want the mixture to have kind of, we want it to be able to have some structural integrity so that it'll hold its form in the soil block. So we want to make sure there's enough water so that it will hold that. And that's also where the compost is really essential, right? That's our structural element. So we'll get this mixed up. We'll add a little bit more water. Somebody once told me you want it kind of the consistency of like a really thick peanut butter. So I think that might be a little thin. So add just a little bit of water. Again, kind of a little bit at a time so it doesn't get too soggy. As you can see, it's starting to, you can squeeze it, it's holding its shape, but you want to be able to kind of toss it without it breaking apart. So it looks like we need to have a little bit more water.
Oh, what happened? We are now seeing Judith's screen. Hang on just a second.
Meanwhile, yes, I'll put the soil block recipe. There are lots of them. They can get really complex, but I'll put the basic one in the chat.
Okay, this is the problem. Sorry, guys. All right.
We'll do a little test to see if consistency.
Nagisa, while you're doing that, Jen had a question about soaking seeds, and most seeds are too small to be able to handle after you soak them.
That has a wide
I'll get back to it. Sorry.
place versus working in a bucket. Well, in a pinch, a bucket works just fine. So we're going to be using these soil blockers. They're available from a number of suppliers. I think initially developed by Elliott Coleman. So we're going to press the soil blocker firmly into our mix. So you can see we'll smooth off the bottom, and then I'm gonna have a tray ready. Then I'm going to press down on this lever and then pull the soil block up, and voila. So we finished making the soil blocks. You can see them here in the tray. And so now we can start seeding. What's nice about the soil blocks is that the contraption itself has a dibble in it. So there's a little indentation, which is perfect for popping your seeds in. And then you can go back over and just give them a little dusting to cover those seeds. They'll take up water from the bottom so that you don't damage the tiny little seeds.
Well, I hope that this has been helpful and you are so excited and feel more prepared to get your garden set up and ready. Now, if you would like to help another family get their garden practice set up and ready, visit us at NOFA-NJ.org and you can learn more about some of our partner cooperative garden projects. So we've got the Bullock Gardens, we've got Kata Crops in Atlantic City, Isles in Trenton, and Newark Conservancy in Newark. And just by donating $50, you will help a family get seeds and the garden plot and someone to stand by and help educate them to enable that family to grow their own food. What a wonderful way to help the community and help make sure that food is available to everyone. So I thank you very much for watching. I hope you're learning and getting all sorts of good stuff out of this. And I look forward to seeing you on our next episode where we're focused more on transplanting and getting the stuff out into the field and getting closer to having some delicious food to eat. So thanks again for watching Organic Gardening. My name is Tony, and I'll see you next time.
All right. So we're back. We have a few minutes left for questions, so hopefully we can tick off some of these questions. I just want to remind everyone that it is a series, so we're only giving you bite-sized chunks so you can if you watch a video and do it, you're perfectly timed for setting up a bed and starting your planting. But as you know, it's been very warm, but also cold at night. And so just because you're excited, don't go and plant everything right now. Only plant the things that are early season seeds. And Al is going to talk to you a little bit about that next up. All right.
So I'm gonna, while you're getting that up, I'm gonna finish answering. I think it was Jen's question about soaking seeds. And most small seeds are too small to soak because you can't really handle them well and you damage them. But I do soak pea seeds. I soak them for between 2 and 2.5 days, no more. They'll start to go bad, I think, or they get too brittle to plant. But several reasons I do that is because number one is it's often you can often get a too wet spell in the spring. And so too wet and too cold. And so sometimes if you plant early, the seeds start to germinate, but then they don't get, the soil isn't warm enough and it gets too wet for too long and they just kind of rot in the soil and you just get poor germination. So I find that with that extra 2 days, 2 to 2.5 days of soaking, I get a lot better germination and a lot better stand. I guess that's it.
Great.
So were you gonna share screen?
Yes, I am going to do that. Yes, because, I don't know if you all remember last year, but I believe the last frost was very close to Mother's Day. So this is why we really warn people not to plant too much in advance, even though it might be fun to do. You'll be very disappointed when you walk out and half of your little seedlings have been killed by frost. So,
I have strict orders. When I get home, my strict orders are I have to help Andrea cover stuff up because it's going to get cold. So everybody get ready if you got stuff out there.
Yeah, I think it's tomorrow night, Tony, actually.
Well, then ahead of time. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly a lot of little seedlings can take quite a bit of frost, but there's some that can't. And so basically this is a planting schedule that I proposed. And can this be available in the
it'll be posted on our site.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Along with the video. Some people have asked if they can see the video again, and we will share everything.
Okay. So good, Nikki, I'm glad you put Oriental greens in there because I often don't plant those. And actually, that was one answer to the earlier question was that a lot of the Oriental greens and or brassicas, which would be kale, including Brussels sprouts, are the flea beetles love them. And I always plant that stuff late because the flea beetles just kind of go away after spring. So I don't think I'm going to read it, especially if it's available, but you can see that there's things that can go in early and those all can take frost. Not much worry. I guess if it's get down to 0 for a week, I'm sure they would suffer, but that never happens this time of year. And I like to let the soil get a little bit warmer before I plant lettuce. I've planted some already, and I direct seed. If you get seedlings, I know there are garden supply stores that sell transplants, and you can plant those at the same time. They're not really much affected by frost unless it gets down into the teens. I like to let the soil warm up a little bit longer before carrots go in, but again, carrots are one of those things that I often don't plant in April. I sometimes don't plant until May and even June because the quality of fall harvested carrots is much better than the summer. They're just a lot sweeter, and because they're a small seed like lettuce and a lot of these other seeds, but they take a lot longer to germinate. So the germination is actually better when the soil is warmed up by June. And I say a week before the new moon, because carrots are a difficult to germinate seed, I plant by the moon. And I know that there's a lot of people who poo-poo that, and but I don't when it comes to carrot seeds, because I really have noticed if you plant about a week before the new moon, they can germinate in about a week. Certainly 10 days at the most. Whereas if you're doing other times of the month, it sometimes takes 2 weeks. And the reason I believe is just because if you think of the, I'm sorry, let me draw the analogy of the going to the beach. If you go to the beach on a new moon and somewhat on a full moon, the tides are a lot higher. The tides will come up a lot higher on those moons. It'll go, more extreme. It'll come up higher, it'll go down lower. There's just a lot more water movement of water on the earth, and there's a lot more water movement in the seed. So it seems to break the carrots a little bit quicker from the germination, and we'll bring them up. But again, beets and chard about the same time. And then I don't try to get, I know the people that plant potatoes earlier, but I don't try to get mine in super early, mid-April, but I often plant mine later in mid-May when the ground's warmed up, because I'm really just planting potatoes for fall harvest. So I'm not in a real hurry. Now you got to go let the soil warm up and pretty much assure that you're not going to get any frost before you put in tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, basil, corn. Those are all things that can be affected by frost. Corn, not so much. But and then I like to let the soil get really warm before I put my cucurbits in. Those are going to be your melons, your squash, your cucumbers. I even sometimes plant them in early June. And I planted in late June. As a matter of fact, the best, we're talking about winter squash, the best winter squash plants I had last year came from my cucumbers, and they didn't really germinate until early July. So let's see, what else? Yeah, and again, beans, okra, things like that, they really like it warm. So late May to early June. So I don't have everything on here. And I don't even plant everything that's on here. Particularly corn, it takes up too much room. If you're new to gardening, that takes a lot of room. So your winter squashes, I love winter squashes. But that may be something that if you only have one bed now, you might want to save that for time when you have two beds. I think that covers that. Nikki.
Yeah, that's cool, Al, because I think we're going to cover everything in more detail next week when you talk about the overall plan for the bed and the season, right?
Yeah, and I think one thing in the video I mentioned, if this was sod, I would treat it differently. And it's really difficult to plant into sod the first year. You pretty much have to remove it. And then there's that question of what about all the soil that's on it? You're now, if you plant a year ahead of time, there is a number of ways. You can cover it with plastic. You can do what's called spaghetti gardening, I think, something like that, where your layers of cardboard and compost and hay or straw or whatever.
Lasagna. It's a lasagna.
Lasagna, that's right. Okay, I know something like that. Tell me things. But you can't, it's difficult to do it right away. Even if you think you've scraped off most of the sod, there's pretty extensive roots there. So a lot of the times the grass has to grow back. It's not impossible. It's just going to take an awful lot of weeding, and it's probably going to be hand weeding too. So.
Yeah, if I can add to that, because I actually did that in the fall. And what I found is that using the black plastic, if you use it in the summer, when it's really, really hot, it'll help to kill most of your grass and weeds. And you can put your compost down, but you need to plant something that's not deep rooted, that doesn't require deep roots. So I actually did garlic, which is relatively shallow roots, and that'll help to break up that lawn soil. But Al's absolutely right. If you go to try to plant something like potatoes in that, you're going to be in serious trouble. So that first year, but you can do light things if you put compost on top, lettuce, garlic, that kind of thing.
Yeah, if you did go into sod, I've used big seeds too. Big seedy things, peas, beans, because those are they're a little easier to control the weeds than the little tiny seedlings.
So I'm sure everybody has experienced leaving a slip and slide or something out on the lawn. And that's what we're talking about. Put in the black plastic they call occultation versus clear plastic solarization. So the sun comes through and extra magnifies, kills all the ants, so to say. It really works great. You need a little bit of time, but you should experiment with it. If you need to clear out a spot, just throw some plastic down, put some weights on it, and it really does a great job.
So to double back to Judith before we turn it over to Sarah, Judith, definitely plant your potatoes in a different spot than you did this year. If you do it before we see you next.
Will do.
All right.
I think I need a whole new bed for potatoes.
All right, so I'm going to briefly turn it over to Sarah O'Leary to talk about what she's been doing in Newark with the community there, so that you guys can consider helping the Newark Conservancy out, as well as the other community garden groups that we're supporting today. All right, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Nikisa and everybody here. So thanks for the opportunity. And I just want to say it's been really exciting. It's been, you know, pandemic has not been great, but it's been a really interesting time to be a community gardener and be involved in community gardens, just because there's been so many connections made over this past year. And I really value the network that we've formed through the Cooperative Gardens Commission, New Jersey, and some of the folks here on this forum are representing and representative of that. And just, yeah, you know, hopefully over the course of this series, you'll get to meet some of my cohort, my other cohort of other community garden focused organizations, like Sonia from Bullock Garden Project and Paige from Crops, and others. But I'm here from Greater Newark Conservancy. We're in Newark, New Jersey. We have been around for, like, I don't know, it's more than 30 years. I feel like I've done almost all 30 of them. I work primarily with school gardens, like you see me here in this picture with a group I'm with. We're doing some soil water testing, I think, there. But we've been doing a lot of support for community gardeners in this past year. With support from Cooperative Gardens Commission, we've been doing a seed share program. So I put that in the chat. If any of you guys are Northern New Jersey gardeners and want to participate in our seed share, we're just sharing free seeds with people so they can grow their gardens, but we would love to get more support for that. And then we've been doing seedlings. So we've been germinating our own seeds, growing on seeds that have been started by all kinds of people. And we did our first, what we called a free plant sale, I think it was 2 weeks ago, of just cool season veggies for folks. We're going to be doing another one in the beginning of May, giving out all the great warm season veggies. And it's allowing home and community gardeners from Newark and surrounding communities to come and get started without having to do a lot of investment on their own. So thanks for this opportunity.
Yeah, I think when we all started to get together last year, we realized that all the community gardens were doing a similar thing, because many people in these urban areas wanted to grow something too, just like everybody who lives in the suburbs. And so we heard from Atlantic City, we heard from Trenton, we heard from all these Newark, we heard from all these urban areas in New Jersey that by just sending home a container and seeds and seedlings, people were able to grow a little something. Maybe it wasn't a lot of food, but it was emotionally restorative to be able to grow something and to supplement the food that they had with something they grew themselves. And so this year we're making a big effort to raise funds so that we can send folks home with more things. So we want to send them home with bags of soil, a shovel, and of course we have this free seeds from the Cooperative Gardens Commission, and NOFA-New Jersey has reached out to organic farmers throughout the state who are donating the plants. So we're really excited about how everybody's working together, but we're making an appeal to all of you, because we're hoping that you can, no matter how much you can donate, it doesn't matter if it's a small amount or a larger amount, it will really help us to get more container gardens and bags of soil out to the community. So whatever you can think to do, that would be great. What you can do is you can either, you can go on to NOFA New Jersey and you'll see links littered through the site. So there's ways to go ahead and donate. Okay. So anyway, that's enough on that. We hope that you have learned something, and that if you if you have any questions between now and next month, please go ahead and email NOFA New Jersey and we'll try and respond back. One of us will help you out. So we know that it's hard to start, but we want to go on this journey with you through the whole season. So hopefully you'll enjoy the fun. All right.
And I'm gonna chime in one last thing. So we apologize if our delivery, our share is choppy. Are some of you experiencing choppy internet flow as you watch the video? I assume it's a yes, but we're going to try and do a similar format where everybody tunes into Zoom, but in the chat, we would have the link to the YouTube. So you could watch this video directly as YouTube plays, and microphones will be off, and we'll kind of be synchronized watches as close as we can, but then leaving Zoom on. So then if we need to pause, Nagisa or myself or whomever is facilitating, if you will, we'll say, okay, pause, let's come back and chat. It won't be that complicated, but it will amplify the delivery of the imagery, which again, as written in the chat, what we're creating is something that we hope to leave in the digital world for other people up and coming who need to learn all of this good information so we can survive on this planet. All right, that's it. Somebody else talk before I get too deep.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you all for joining us. This has been really fun. And I look forward to the next session and seeing more of your faces.
All right.
Because I want to make a comment to Judith's question. So if people want to drop off, that's fine. But if you want to stay and listen too. Judith, don't get discouraged about your winter squash. Last year was not a good year. As a matter of fact, I actually just looked this up. I didn't get any female flowers last year until July 25th. And I often have fully formed fruit, large fully formed fruit by July 25th. I think it was the heat, but I'm not sure. And then if you're choosing varieties, I would try going back to butternut squash if you didn't do that last year. Butternut squash, I found it's a little bit more resistant to powdery mildew. All the plants will get powdery mildew eventually, but butternut seems to have a slower onset, and it seems to be able to continue to produce fruit a little bit better. So probably if you had other varieties last year, if you had butternut, it would have just been late. But if you had other varieties, by that time in July, they may have been started affected too much by powdery mildew, and they probably just wouldn't have produced fruit. I didn't have a good crop last year. I had an okay crop, but I was amazed at how the fact I just didn't see any female flowers.
I had the same problem. I had no female flowers.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
Right. Everyone have a great evening, and maybe you have some asparagus since asparagus is now in season. Enjoy. All right. Take care, everyone.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye-bye.